Hello. So if you've been following the Connect Together content, as you know, every society is putting in um, content, virtual content. And today, Tetra's contribution, I am very pleased to do a one-on-one interview with Glenn Barnes. And Glenn and I have known each other for a number of years. And Glenn has a great story of his involvement with Tetra. So I'm going to let you hear, hopefully through this, you hear about Tetra from Glenn's perspective and kind of the great things and projects that he's been involved with. So welcome, Glenn, and thanks for taking time to do this today.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. I appreciate you giving me the chance to do this. I'm going to actually flip the script on you for a second because I think it's more clear out in BC, but I don't know that people understand the structure of the Disability Foundation, because you started off there with saying all the foundations, and I don't know the people out east here in Toronto, the center of the universe, as they say, kidding, of course, is they don't really understand all the different societies.
Sure.
So maybe you could explain a little bit about that.
See, that's why it's great to do an interview with Glenn, because he points out things from different perspectives and things you might have overlooked. So for those who've heard this before, maybe a recap, and for those who haven't. So the Disability Foundation, you can use different metaphors, but I always say think of a tree. And if the Disability Foundation is the tree trunk, then the branches that the foundation oversees are our other societies. So the Disability Foundation itself is a registered nonprofit, and what makes up the foundation is other programs. So of course we have Tetra, and Tetra is our one national organization. We have 30 chapters across Canada, and that is where we have people like Glenn and other cities and regions helping connect people with disabilities who have a unique challenge with technically skilled volunteers. And of course, for that to happen, there's promotion and fundraising and many different aspects of Tetra, but we do try to come up with cost-effective assistive devices for all aspects of daily living. So that's one. There is VAMS, the Vancouver Adapted Music Society, and that is where we have an adapted music studio where members of VAMS have the courage to either record a tape or have the ability to get out there and perform. So VAMS tries to facilitate somebody's love of music, either in our studio, our choir, or performances, and that's based in Vancouver. We have BC Moss. We say that for short. The long name is the BC Mobility Opportunity Society. And when you think of that society, think of wilderness access. And we have something called the Trail Rider. And the Trail Rider has handles on the front and the back, and it's got a wheel underneath. If you think of a souped-up rickshaw or wheelbarrow, for people who are not ambulatory but want to get out in nature, we have the Trail Rider. And we rent that all throughout Canada, and we have a page on the BC Moss website called Trail Ride Around the World. So if you're listening to this and thinking, well, most of the programs are Vancouver-based, again, Tetra is national. And again, the Trail Rider is in Japan. It's all over the place, Australia. And we also do offer locally in Vancouver adapted paddleboarding as well. Check out the Disability Foundation YouTube channel for videos like that. Then we have ConnecTra, which is really the society that helps create awareness of what's going on, not only within the foundation, but within the disabled community. So you may get an email from ConnecTra updating you on changes of disability benefits or a webinar that we're going to have. And ConnecTra, of course, is hosting this Connect Together, and that's about workshops and finding out about information that's interested to you that hopefully you connect with. We also have the Disabled Sailing Association. It was founded and started in Vancouver, but it does disabled sailing happens all throughout Canada and in the world. It's a Paralympic sport. we are fortunate enough to have our program, which has been going on for over 30 years down at Jericho Beach. And the boats have been modified so they're not going to tip, and you can get out there on the water. And then we also have DIGA, Disabled Independent Gardeners Association. Our association here in Vancouver has workshops, does home gardening, gardening tips, and has community gardens where you can access a garden bed. And of course, Tetra is the organization that helps make those modifications and make gardening more accessible. So that is kind of an overview of, as I mentioned to Glenn, our other programs and the Disability Foundation, other affiliated organizations. Anything that I missed, Glenn, or that you would add?
No, that's a great capture synopsis of that. As I said, I don't know that people know a lot about things like Vancouver Adapted Music and DIGA, the Disabled Independent Gardener. But we do have a trail rider here in the Mississauga area that's available for rent. And we do have, or we have had, people involved in disabled sailing, but it's unfortunately in this neck of the woods, not run by Tetra, it's run by an independent organization. And, you know, I'm in Mississauga, but, you know, kind of to the west of us, there's Burlington Adapted Sailing, and then down in Toronto, there's Disabled Sailing Queens Quay. And so they are, some of them are around us, but we're not involved as a overreaching umbrella organization in this area of the woods. So good clarification though.
But you would definitely make referrals if somebody asked and said, I wanted to trail ride, or if you were to share an experience on sailing, Tetra would be happy to make a referral to those organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And as I said, in our Mississauga office, Tetra Ontario's office, we do have a trail rider that's available for rent. And it's actually such that we don't even charge any fee for the rental. We just want to make sure we get people's identification and number so that we know we can make an arrangement to get it back once they've used it for a weekend or a day or whatever it is they've wanted. We've rented it out to individuals, rented it out to McMaster University, rented it out to downtown Active Living downtown, and I forget what the other one's called, something about Hike Ontario. Yeah, and so they're available here to take and rent, and I'd be glad to set that up if anyone wanted to contact me or anyone else in the Tetra loop, really, and we'll be able to get to you and get you the particulars about it. So
awesome. Well, thanks for reminding me as well about the trail rider that you have at the Tetra office. So to focus on exactly that, though, because the Tetra is the main society that you work with, and of course that's how you and I have been working through the years. So why don't you tell us or talk about how you came to get involved with Tetra?
Yeah, sure, I will, for sure. So way back in, I believe it was 1997, they had the Disabled Sailing Regatta. So it's kind of I wouldn't say a Canadian regatta, I think it's kind of a worldwide regatta. Because if I remember correctly, there was people that came over to sail from Portugal and Australia into Toronto that particular year. And I was fairly newly injured. I had a spinal cord injury in 1992. I broke my neck when I dove into a pool, and I spent kind of 92 to 94-ish in and out of rehab hospitals. And then I was at home kind of between 94 and 96 or 97. I forget when the exact date was. And I went down to the sailing regatta just as a piece of interest. I had no involvement in it. I had no affiliation or connection to it. I heard it was going on. It was in Toronto. First time it had ever been in the Toronto area. So I went down, and I happened to be asked if I had any plans for lunch? And I said, no, I didn't know what I was going to do. And they said, well, we've got free lunch here for all the participants. And I said, well, I'm not a participant. And they said, that's okay, don't worry about it. Sat down at a table and got some lunch. And the gentleman that happened to sit beside me was Sam Sullivan, who is the man who founded the Tetra Society. And, you know, loosely, I guess they don't use it much anymore, but the Disability Foundation, which you mentioned as the trunk of our organizations, was at one point in time called the Sam Sullivan Disability Foundation. And we kind of dropped the Sam Sullivan off of it for the most part, I understand. But at any rate, so what happened was we were eating lunch and introducing myself to Sam, and he introduced himself to me and told me all about Tetra. And I said, wow, you know, it sounds like a great organization. And he asked what I did. And I said, to be honest with you, I don't do a whole lot right now. I said, I got hurt a few years back and really haven't found anything to keep me busy or keep me interested or whatever. And so he said, well, I'll give you my card and I'll take your information. And we connected a couple of weeks after that, and he got me involved with the Tetra Society in Ontario here, mostly kind of Toronto stuff to start off with. And I, in the beginning, did the chapter coordination out of the Peel region chapter, and did that for a number of years. I don't remember exactly how many, probably 4 or 5. And then kind of moved on to start into some fundraising and whatnot. So that's kind of what my role is today, is more of a fundraising partner or person, I guess. And I work with some different people and do fundraising for all across Ontario. So yeah.
Okay. And I always find the common thread is, you know, it's just a meeting. It could be by chance, but great things can happen, and lifelong friendships or opportunities can be formed just by taking that chance and getting out there. And you know, as you said, you never know who you're going to meet or sit next to. So so that's how you met Sam and kind of your involvement. So is it Sam that gave you the opportunity, or how did you become a coordinator? Did you decide that this is something, because I'm navigating a disability myself, that I could help with? What kind of got you ready for that, to be in that position in Peel?
I think right at the conversation at the disabled sailing event, Sam said to me, would you be interested in joining our organization and working with us to expand in Peel and make other projects for people with disabilities, even make products for yourself as well? I said, yeah, absolutely. And I didn't really know, you know, whether this was going to, you know, be, you know, stimulating for me, or whether it was going to be the thing I wanted to do, or just something to, you know, poke around in a little bit and then sort of maybe just, you know, wean myself off of it or something. But I think Sam put me in touch with Pat Tweedy, who formerly had your job, I think. And Pat asked me about working as a Peel chapter coordinator, and it kind of went on from there. And, you know, it was really amazing because I did the chapter coordination for Peel, which, you know, was, you know, finding other people with disabilities that needed an assistive device made around their house. And I was doing the regular chapter coordinator duties of going around, doing presentations all over the city, talking to groups of people with disabilities, just engaging the disability community in general. And then I would put ads in the paper to get volunteers to build the devices. And I always remember a bit of a funny story. I'd been going around for a few weeks. I think I probably made 6 to 7 presentations to different places in the disability community. And then I put one little silly ad, a public service announcement in our local Mississauga paper, and it was free. I didn't have to pay for it or anything, and I didn't expect anything out of it at all. And from it came, I think it was 4 or 5 volunteers, all eager to do projects, but I didn't have any projects for them to do. And I thought to myself, well, it's going to be dead simple talking to other people with disabilities to get projects, but it's not going to be so easy to get volunteers. Well, I found out the exact opposite. I got volunteers at the snap of a finger, and then I had to go out and hustle and try and find them to do, devices to make and gizmos to make. And so what I ended up doing was probably getting 2 or 3 of them to make things for myself first, just to keep them busy so that they wouldn't, say, this organization is no good, they're not busy enough. So I kept them busy, and then projects started to roll in, and that's kind of how it all started. And it wasn't totally 100% what I wanted to do in life. I was a teaching assistant at a high school, wanting to get into teachers college, but applied right out of university and didn't get in my first year. And so I went to work at a high school as a teaching assistant to get some experience. And the job I was in was quite a physical job. And, being in the wheelchair as I was after the injury, I didn't really think I was going to be a good job for me to go back into. And I probably, quite honestly, would have gone back into it if the school board would have been a little bit more enthusiastic and been a little bit more of a partner in terms of getting me to go and come back to work and getting me involved in the school board again and really taking an active place in my life, I guess. But the role that they took was basically they sent out a vocational resource worker from one of the insurance companies that they had partnered with. And the person came in, sat down on my couch, asked me a bunch of questions, and then said, okay, well, thanks very much. I'll have some recommendations for you soon. And I said, you don't have to write recommendations down on a piece of paper. What do you think before you leave, kind of thing? And she said, well, quite honestly, if I were you, I'd just stay home and collect the checks for being on disability leave. And that, crushed me as a 24 or 5-year-old kid that, was just trying to find his way in a whole new life that had turned completely upside down from where I was to what I became after I acquired my injury. And, I was pretty angry at that and didn't really want to get involved in much. So that's why it took me 2 or 3 years to figure out to do something until I met Sam. But what was really great was the role that Sam took in getting me involved. And he didn't just, pass me off to the national coordinator. Every now and then, he would call me up and he would say, listen, I'm coming into town. I've got a few people to visit. What I'd like you to do is tag along with me, and we'll go to these different places. So I started meeting all these people, and they were people from family foundations. They were people from all kind of walks of life that really kind of circled around the disability community, and really people that were very forward thinking and very, very bought into the idea of, people with disabilities not only need to be part of society, they need to kind of take a leading role in society, which really was a huge change for me. I had always looked at it as, now I have a disability and I'm looked upon as that little guy sitting in the chair now. And, that I'd never really heard anything like that before. So it was
I have to say it's been even in hearing this story, because to me, when I met you, so you mentioned Pat Tweedy, the national coordinator. For those who know Pat, she's retired now. And if she was part of this interview, she would say, I'm not responsible for Eric whatsoever. So, but Pat originally hired me and brought me along in Tetra. And of course, when I met you, I was just starting out with Tetra. So to me, you were always such a professional person and a great speaker and so knowledgeable in things. And you were always so welcoming to me when we met at the conference. So for you to share that your background was, an educator and a teacher, that makes sense. Because when I think of you, much like Sam himself, I think of a guy who can make connections with anybody and is great at making a presentation or telling a story. So knowing that background, that you've definitely put that to good use. And then I love what you said about the volunteers, and for those who are involved in Tetra or just in their daily life, it's a reminder you never know what might work, right? Kind of something that you thought, well, this is free. How can I not take advantage of this opportunity? And it worked. So, and then you did have projects. So maybe talk about some of the first projects that you had made for yourself by Tetra and how that led to greater independence for you.
Yeah, I think the first thing that I got done was something for my van. Like it was something to do with being able to flip up the, back in those days, not all vehicles had automatic door openers, so, or even automatic locks for that case. And so it was some sort of a tool to flip up the lock to unlock it. And that was sort of a just in case, because I remember one time I was in the van, my dad was driving and I was just a passenger. And he went out to pick up something, not for me, but just for him. Says, okay, if we stop here, yeah, sure. He locked the vehicle, but he had left the key in the vehicle. And the way I was sitting and locked in to supports so that I wouldn't move around in the vehicle, I couldn't reach any of the door locks. So we were kind of stuck. And that was one of the first projects, was a little thing to jimmy up the door lock that was sort of connected to the door. You just had to put a little bit of downward force on it. It would pop the lock up, and then that was it. It was a very, very simple thing, but meaningful enough because we had been stuck in the car once, and it was like 300 degrees outside, and I was baking hot, and it's, out of necessity comes many Tetra projects. So
yes, and I know you've passed along that message. That really is the heart of a Tetra device. It's whatever works for the individual, and it doesn't have to be complicated. And our volunteers talk about all the time, the simplest solution can be the most effective one. And so from those devices and things, your dad got involved as a volunteer. Did you recruit him? And over the years, your dad has contributed so much to Tetra. He is a member of the Tetra Volunteer Lifetime Achievement Award. So is it you that recruited your dad? Did he get involved because he thought he had a skill set? Tell us how that connection happened.
Yeah, I think it was a little bit of both. I probably had more to do with recruiting him than anything else, but I did so because I knew he was a pretty handy guy and liked building lots of things, liked tinkering, liked keeping busy. And so he was kind of a natural fit for Tetra in terms of being able to do what it is we do, and build things. And so actually from there, he got another family friend involved, who was a industrial designer, engineer and industrial design teacher at a local college here, Sheridan College in Brampton. And so he came on for a little while. And he actually did, outside of that little door opener project, he actually did my first project that I did for somebody else, not for me. And I always remember it. I was for a girl named Debbie, who was paralyzed right from the neck down. And Debbie was a go-getter. She was involved in, she was on the board at Tetra for a while. She was involved in disabled sailing. She was involved in, anything you can imagine, painting. And so that's what we did for her, was we built a painting easel. And it was for the Mouth Painters Association. And this guy put together an easel. So you could probably picture, most people would understand an easel that stands on a tripod type stand, you know, in the air kind of thing, right? And it's like a canvas that is usually sits on a ledge or sits on a backing that's got tripod legs, you know, down to the floor. And what this guy did was he made the canvas movable, and he did that by attaching a motor, a rotary motor, to the back of the big canvas. And you could put on any size canvas, really small, really big, wouldn't make a difference. And then he put on a little micro switch. So what Debbie was able to do with two little micro switches, one on each side of the easel, is with her mouth and a brush in her mouth, just touch the micro switch activation device. It was sort of like a long toggle switch. And she would just touch that, and it would cause the easel to move around in a circle. And she could hold it down to make it move a lot, or just touch it once to make it move a little. And the reason why she did that is because she was only painting with her mouth, she could lean forward and with her mouth do the painting like this, but she couldn't reach all the corners of the painting. And so she would spin it around a little bit, and then she would get the top left corner, spin it around a little bit more, and get the bottom left corner. So it was amazing, amazing device this guy put together. And I always remember the one thing is, they were family friends, and I remember, you know, he came to a meeting a short while after he finished the project, and you know, generally at the volunteer meetings, they kind of discuss whatever projects they're working on that particular time. And so he was discussing how he had built this easel, and then he said, yeah, my wife isn't very happy with me. And everybody's like, what do you mean your wife's not very happy with it? Like, this is a brilliant thing. Like, this easel is unbelievably brilliant. And he's like, yeah, but the rotary motor that I used to turn the easel around, the painting around, that was the rotary spit motor off our barbecue. So he said,
Yeah.
couldn't cook with the barbecue on the rotary spit anymore, which I guess they did a lot. They would put a roast on and let it spin for a couple of hours, but he had to go buy a new one. So
Yeah. Wow.
yeah, very resourceful, very resourceful.
Well, that is an awesome story in many regards, because it shows, as you said, the ingenuity and resourcefulness of a volunteer, and the commitment to deny his own wife rotisserie barbecue.
Yes,
that's commitment.
And
That's
really, it does speak to one of the things that Tetra is pretty passionate about, and that is trying to get a device made for a person at the lowest cost possible.
Yeah.
And so in this case, he didn't go out and buy a fancy motor to turn the easel. He actually used the barbecue spit motor and just said, we don't use it anyways. And it was like zero cost. So
Yeah.
we put that whole easel together for, I think it was $140, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
And she had been to some people, iron workers and welders, asking them if they could put something together, and they said they could, but it would probably cost $8,000 to $10,000, and we built it for like $120. So, you know, that made me feel really quite proud, and just to see her face when we got it to her, you know, that kept me going for a couple of years probably.
Yeah, and just because it was less cost doesn't mean it was less effective or any less impactful. Did you end up getting a painting of hers yourself?
Well, what we did actually, funny you say that, I didn't get a painting myself. I probably should have, to keep the memory, although I have it in my head. But what we did is we got her to paint a couple of paintings, and we held something called the Gizmo Awards, which is, we would collect all the Tetra projects done by volunteers all around. At this time, it was a bit smaller, so it was mostly the Greater Toronto area. And we had 5 or 6 projects that we were trying to evaluate which one's going to be the best. And for it, we had a silent auction, and she painted 2 or 3 paintings to auction off for the silent auction. So that was pretty cool.
Well, for sure, the full circle of somebody giving back to Tetra, and I was going to lead into that because that was one of the things that you organized is to celebrate the efforts of the volunteers. The Gizmo Award, kind of a neat name, um, to symbolize the devices they create for people. And on a number of occasions, you did organize, as you said, it started small, but then you did one for Greater Ontario, and I know Sylvia Balaco, I think, has joined in things, and and as you said, you started out as a coordinator, but what I know you as more than anything else is teaching and encouraging others, mentoring others in different positions in Tetra, and you have for a long time done the fundraising. So when you were a coordinator and getting out there and making connections, were you ever apprehensive of making? You mentioned that you made a bunch of presentations in a week. Were you ever apprehensive about making presentations or approaching people for devices or to volunteers?
Not too apprehensive. I always was pretty comfortable speaking in public and meeting new people and um, I really, well, I guess what it really did, it was somewhat cathartic in the sense that it allowed me to start meeting people in the disability community who then I further connected with down the road to begin doing other things and working on other committees so I guess the way the disability community I think functions a lot is that first off, there's always an endless amount of stuff to do. There's never a short list of things to do when you're working with people with disabilities and trying to create a better quality of life for people, whether it's through Independent Gardener, whether it's through Mobility Society, Tetra, whatever it is. It's about creating more opportunity, creating a better quality of life. And in talking to people around, I started meeting other people and started realizing like, yeah, I like the way this person thinks. They're very forward thinking. And so I would invite them to a Gizmo Awards. They would get involved a little bit as a supporter. They might buy a few things at our silent auction, but then later they would invite me to an event that they held. And that got me involved in doing some work with the city of Mississauga, but volunteer work mostly, with the region of Peel and also with the province of Ontario. Basically, this is, we're talking now 6, 8, 10 years down the road. I was now in meetings with, government officials, local, municipal, regional, and even provincial. And, I was the one who was the disability expert, and that, obviously makes you feel good. But I remember being in one of those meetings. It was about transportation and buses. And, this was just one of the things that I learned through Tetra, having to get out and go to different places. You would get on a paratransit bus or whatever it may be. And the paratransit service really wasn't very good. And so I got involved in the paratransit service, trying to improve its quality, which led me to sort of do some other things. But, it leads you to do little things like, I would always say in a transportation meeting, obviously with people that I hadn't met before, despite all the things that you read about what, it's like to get on a bus in a wheelchair or in a scooter or whatever, despite all the accounts you hear from people, you'll never quite understand what it's like until you actually do it yourself. And so that always gave me a leg up on, being a disability expert. And I branched out, as I said, to transportation. And then we brought in some legislation here in Ontario called the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act. And I sat on the transportation committee developing standards for the province, and what buses were going to look like, and also too about the fairness between what the paratransit service was like and what the conventional transit service was like. I know I was involved in the paratransit service. Again, sort of this is just Tetra led into all this stuff. And I wasn't really doing it because, initially I wasn't really doing it because I wanted to make the world a better place or anything. Initially, I was doing it because I was with Tetra and I needed to get around to different places. That's why I initially got involved in some of these other things. And then it became, look, we can do some good here. We can make some big changes. And, when I was introduced in these meetings, it would always be introduced as a coordinator of the Tetra Society. And so that got the name of the Tetra Society involved in a lot more things. It gave it a lot of credibility around the Greater Toronto Area and in the province. And, that only expanded as we got chapters in Ottawa and Kingston and London and Hamilton and Guelph and York region and whatnot. So, and Toronto, of course. But
and you helped with all that, and what you said there, it's very similar to Sam's own journey. When he thought of, Tetra initially, he was writing to the Professional Engineers Society asking for help because he wanted to be able to get into the fridge and do daily living stuff. VAMS came about because, he loved music and wanted a new way to figure out how to play keyboard and stuff. And, out of figuring out your own personal interests, it can be a great way to say to yourself, well, if I like doing this, other people do too. And, by finding your own interests or ways to get around. I know you've been instrumental throughout the years of the expansion of Tetra in Ontario. And I wanted to follow up because it is different to do the coordinating, which you did for a number of years, and then move into the fundraising. So how did that transition happen? Because certainly, you've been a part of some great projects. I'm going to ask you to speak about how you helped really grow the university clubs and have that connection. Because one of the great things that I love seeing of the volunteers is an experienced volunteer like your father, or like the guy who made the adapted easel, working with the next generation of engineers who are going to school or doing studies and how they see the world. And how did you first make that transition to now you're going to help sustain Tetra through funds, and how did you make that transition from the coordinator to funds development?
So again, it was basically, with Sam over my shoulder kind of thing, saying to me like, why don't you try this? Why don't you try that? Oh, listen, I got some people for you to go meet, things like that. As I got to know people better, things kind of naturally evolved in the sense that, I would meet the people that Sam would call me to say to go meet. And then I would call them back and say, yeah, they were stoked about the idea. And this was a person that, was involved in money at some level, dispersing money at some level. And I said, I think they're interested, but I think we'd have to put together a big cohesive plan to expand, add in chapters and so on and so forth. He said, well, put it together and take it back down to them and see what they think. And if they want some changes, we'll change it. And so it kind of started that way. That led to, we don't have a chapter there anymore, but, one of the big things years back was we needed to get Northern Ontario involved. That was more of a government ask. And so we ended up getting a chapter in Sudbury with a friend, Earl Black, who I also met at the 2002 National Conference at Tetra. He was there more out of interest sake. He wasn't a chapter coordinator then, or he wasn't involved in anything to do with Tetra then. But, I met him there and, it's just sort of a natural fit. We expanded chapters, then that led to needing more money to expand to, add in services. Things started to get a little stale maybe in terms of all the different chapters and them needing a little financial boost, but also maybe a little bit of a boost in terms of new business generation and finding new avenues to do things and to do projects. And you know, in some cities, it's like, you know, as a chapter coordinator, I can remember the experience. I'm thinking to myself, you know, it's a never-ending situation of chasing my own tail. You know, I'll go out and make some presentations, get 3 or 4 people with disabilities interested in doing projects, and then I got to go find the volunteers to do it. And then they jump in and do it. And then they say, okay, well, what else? And I say, well, now I got to go back out and find more projects from more people with disabilities. So it's just a circle of me whizzing around trying to, you know, close the loop all the time. And when you're in a bit of a smaller city, I mean, I'm lucky to be in a little bit bigger city in Mississauga, but when you're in a smaller city, maybe like Kingston or London, you kind of keep tapping the same resources to get projects. And after a while, people aren't generally interested. So you look at it from a different way to approach it. And we decided that we would sort of approach it instead of from the client end, trying to generate more devices for people with disabilities, we would generate it from the volunteer end. And they seemed to be, you know, the funding sources seemed to be happy to listen to how we would improve volunteerism in Ontario. And so it was really just a new spin on an old procedure kind of thing, but that led to us, you know, one of the big parts of doing that, and it was really more at my insistence than anything else, was convincing the people that were the funding authorities that people with disabilities should be taking up a lot of these jobs as chapter coordinators in different regions and different cities throughout the province. And so, you know, that led to a couple of almost like an intern type funding program that we had that was funded by, you know, 1 or 2 levels of government. And then we ended up getting you know, a full-fledged volunteer grant, and I think it was at the insistence of the province on that one, was that we somehow get the schools involved, the universities involved. And so it was really just a general volunteer program, but they wanted to expand it to students. And then as we got talking about it a little bit more, we realized that if we could make it all students and use our existing volunteers as mentors. And, you know, so it's always just kind of looking for a fresh hook on a new idea that interests people that are doling out the money. And you know, the fundraising game is a little bit of a, yeah, it's a little bit of a tough sell sometimes because, you know, generally speaking, you know, not to sound pessimistic or anything, but generally speaking, the funds available for disability related programs, services, supports, you know, operating expenses, et cetera, are generally quite limited. And they tend to just sort of walk around the block and, well, we'll give some to Tetra this time, 2 years down the road, we'll give someone to the organization beside Tetra, then we'll give some to the other organization, then the other organization. And, you know, you're waiting for them to walk back around the block till they get back to you again to get more funding. And so trying to present new ideas, new spins, you know, was just a way to continue getting more and more funding. And yeah, it's a tough game in terms of the fundraising business. You have to have a pretty thick skin because, you know, you'll write proposals for 15, 20, 25 different, you know, family foundations, levels of government, et cetera, and you'll be lucky to get one out of that whole 15, 20, 25 proposals that you put out there. So, and when it's a bigger proposal, you know, it's even harder because A, you're asking for a bigger amount of money, but the resources you need to bring in to make that bigger program happen, you know, one of the things that, you know, government likes to hang their hat on when they give you money is that, well, we don't want this to be just Tetra. We want it to be more collaborative in nature. So can you bring in other disability organizations that will enhance what you're trying to do? And then you got to go out and talk to some fellow disability organization groups and say, you know, I want you to come in as a partner on this. And, we ended up partnering with Coalition for Persons with Disabilities and Erin Oak, which is a children's treatment center here in Mississauga. And then we got involved in the resource fair. And so we were organizing the resource fair. I think they've done 18 or 19, maybe it's in the 20s now. I don't know, but we would not only have a table and a presence at this resource fair, really basically a trade show, but we also got involved in the organization of that. And that would lead to finding a little bit of pots of money here and there. And so it's really just trying to find ways to keep paying the bills and, to keep everything going. And that's sometimes a difficult game, but one that I enjoy, and I enjoy sort of keeping everybody active and stuff. So it's good.
Sure. Well, you have done a great job at fundraising with Tetra Glen, and some of the initiatives of the student clubs or the student chapters still exist to this day with Ryerson. So my last question for you would be, how have you seen assistive devices change throughout the years, kind of Tetra requests, and what are you most hopeful to see as far as the advancements of assistive devices or Tetra initiatives?
Yeah, I think over the years, I think we've seen a lot of things become more mainstream, and the tech giants of the world, your Microsofts, your Apples, your other organizations that are involved in building tech for people, I think are really now starting to take into consideration the needs of people with disabilities. I know a few people that work for those organizations, and they say that really nothing gets conceived and developed unless it has an accessibility / disability spin on it. And so I think over the years, things like that have made it a little bit easier. I use my phone now to access lights and things like that, whereas we were putting, toggle switch extensions on light switches in people's apartments before. We were doing a lot of things that are now naturally taken care of by, general tech out there. So there still is a need, because the simple projects are the ones that are overlooked. And even though tech is involved in a lot more newer assistive devices, they're, what I said to you about a while back about the being in meetings about transportation and buses, is that regardless of how well they develop something at Apple or at Microsoft that is supposed to be geared towards people with disabilities, there will always be people with disabilities that are going to chime in and say, this doesn't work for this, or this doesn't work for that. So a perfect example of that is what we're doing right now to conduct this interview is a Zoom meeting, and Zoom has really taken off. It's become a huge thing for a lot of people. But recently, in the last 2-3 weeks, I think I've seen more and more and more posts on social media, LinkedIn and stuff about, well, where's the fair access for people that are deaf to get closed captioning on Zoom? And that's not available right now. So no matter how good tech is, there's always going to be loopholes where people with disabilities are not supported as well as they should be. And that's somewhat where Tetra falls in, and a big tech project like Zoom is not, our wheelhouse, but smaller projects where, good tech comes in place, but it just doesn't quite meet the needs of everyone with a disability. That's where we often step in and make a modification, or, redesign something, or add a toggle switch, or, do something to make it actually usable. So that's where I kind of see things advancing further in the future. And, hopefully that expands into, what transportation would be like on airplanes, where you can actually sit in your wheelchair rather than sit in an airplane seat and try and do all that nonsense of transferring to get into airplane seats and whatnot.
Yes, that would be amazing.
Yeah.
And as you said, where applicable, Tetra tries to be the bridging of the gap and help with the solutions. And you've been a great resource and advocate for that. It's been great to work with you, Glenn, over the years. I was just chuckling to myself for this interview. I was thinking when we first met, and there was a national conference in 2002. And believe it or not, the final day of the conference was on the same day of the gold medal men's hockey game
That's
in
right.
2002. So I remember you and I had talked throughout the conference, and as the closing comments were being given, I was inching further and further to the door so I could make sure to get out of there and I had the home advantage because it was in Vancouver at the time. So I'm glad to say that I made it for the puck drop, but I always smile at that because it was great to get to know you then and great to get to know you throughout the years, and keep up the great work, and thanks so much for your time.
Well, thank you for getting me involved here with the interview today. And yeah, it's been great working with you as well in terms of, being able to call someone when I'm stuck on something and know that I can get a good hand and a good ear. And if you don't know, you'll find somebody who does know, kind of thing. So it's always been good. I thank you. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, as always, we'll be in touch, and stay tuned to this channel and more information about Connect Together. Thanks again, Glenn.
Okay, thanks. And stay home and stay safe, eh?
Yes, we'll do our best.